Hello, it's me. I'm back. I'm Scott Arthur. I'm the course leader for D21UD, Urban Drainage and Water Supply. So this is the second Class 1 video lecture, and it really just forms a broader introduction to the course as a whole. So in this lecture I'll go through some of the key points that will come up later in the course, just really the key concepts, not the detail. Just to try to give you more of a detail of what we'll be speaking about. So it kind of forms a firm foundation for a lot of what we'll cover over the next 10, 11 weeks or so. So these three pictures at the front here really, to me, sum up a lot of what urban drainage is about. So it's about amenity. So the picture on the left, we've got the people there on the bridge. For some reason that person with a pushchair is looking at those two other people kissing. That's a bit odd, but really they're there because that's a fantastic environment. They're looking at the ducks in the water and all the rest of it. In the middle we've got the management of flood risk. It's not been managed that well in that picture, as you can see. And on the right we've got the ducks, in fact they're frogs, in a pond. So it's about protecting the environment so we can enjoy it. It's about managing flood risk, and it's about protecting biodiversity. So those three things really underpin a lot of what urban drainage is about. I think when I graduated back in, 1992, a lot of the focus was just on the middle picture there. A lot of the focus was on managing flood risk. But since then, there was an increased focus on protecting the environment, and then more laterally also thinking about amenity, about how we can actually use urban drainage to make the developments that we build better places to live and be, and make us healthier, happier people in a small way. So that this lecture today, we'll kind of look at those themes as we work our way through these slides. So I've covered in the last lecture about this book and why I think it's a good idea you buy it, etc. I'll leave it up to you to make your mind up whether or not you agree with that. So why do we need drainage systems? So when rain falls on undeveloped land, the vast majority of it tends to be absorbed by that land. It's soaked into the surface, kind of like a sponge, and either stay there and infiltrate the groundwater, or it will slowly trickle off to run off the surface and trickle to the local water course. And that can take hours, or it can take days. So the final paragraph here is key. So even short heavy storms may have little impact on flow rates in the receiving water, so that's the water course closest to where the rain's falling, because much of the rainwater may be absorbed by the ground. Okay, so that's kind of the natural system. So why don't urbanised catchments work like this? Well, in short, because we build on the surface. So when a catchment is developed, the proportion of land which is covered by impervious surfaces increase, and that prevents the water being absorbed by the ground. Often the remaining open ground can't accept water as rapidly because there's less of it. And quite often people look at things like parks, and we assume there's quite high infiltration rates in parks. Well, of course, compared to tarmac and concrete, it is high. But where you've got a small urban park which is quite heavily used, the surface can be quite compacted, so the infiltration rate wouldn't be the same as on a greenfield site. Okay, so there's paved surfaces, there's managed green space, and then there's also greenfield sites, and all these things perform differently. And of course, there's much more variety of surfaces than that. Okay. So if we look at the problems caused by this, we have surface water flooding. on the left. Sewer flooding, so the water gets into the sewer and then comes back out again. If where the water makes it to the river, it can increase the flood risk because the water now isn't being absorbed by the catchment quite as much, and it's running off the surface quicker, so getting to the river quicker. So there's more of it getting there quicker, so you get higher peak flows. It can cause erosion in the river, which is not a good thing because that means about destruction of habitats, and also the pollutants that come from the urban surfaces, whether it's intentional or not, can pollute that watercourse as well. So these kind of 5 things encapsulate a lot of the problems we have. So how did we traditionally solve this problem? Well, so in most of the UK and in most of the EU and elsewhere, your property is connected to some sort of drainage system, and these will normally be one of 2 types. So the first, which is largely properties in the UK built before the Second World War, are combined properties. So that means there's a single pipe which is connected to that property, which both the foul flow, so that's the flow from your WC, your shower, your bath, your washer basin, your washing machine, your dishwasher and all the rest of it, goes into a pipe. And in the same pipe goes the water from the rainfall runoff from your roof, from your drive if you've got one, from the footpath outside your house, and from the road outside your house. So it means you're mixing rainwater and foul water. You're combining it into one pipe. And these days that pipe goes all the way to the wastewater treatment works, where that water's treated. We remove a lot of the pollutants as much as we can, and then return the water to the environment. So the way you look at this is that we start off with dirty water coming from the house, from the WC, etc. And we mix that with cleaner rainwater, combine it all together. We convey it for miles to the wastewater treatment works, and then we try to decombine it to some extent. Okay, so it seems crazy, but that's what we do. The alternative to that, which really came in after the Second World War, is separate systems. So this is where you have all your foul flows from your house connect to a foul pipe out in the street. So that's the flows from your kitchen, your bathroom, etc. connects to that pipe, and that pipe goes all the way to the wastewater treatment works. Then you have a separate pipe which connects your roof, your drive, your footpath, the path outside your house, and the road. And that's a surface water pipe, and all those flows go in that pipe along with those with all your neighbours, etc. And that pipe tends to take the flows to the nearest water course. So that might be a nearby river, etc. So that's a separate system. Hybrid systems, as the name suggests, is somewhere between the two. These, which are mostly separate, but the wastewater system will have some surface inputs. So it might be that you've got a surface which is considered to be highly polluted. So near where I live, there's an IKEA. Not too near, I have to say. There's an IKEA, and at the back of that there's a big yard which is used for washing down the vehicles. And it's recognised that a lot of the pollutants that are washed off the vehicles are quite harmful to the environment. So rather than that getting discharged into the river via the separate drainage system, those flows go into the foul drainage network, and it goes to the treatment works, which is probably a good thing. So that's a different kind of network. So traditionally that's how that was dealt with. So here we go. So in the UK, etc., around 70% of the sewer lengths are combined. During rainfall events, surface water flows predominate. So that means that you've got a pipe, and during dry weather flow, only a small proportion of that pipe is used up to convey the foul flows, and it has lots of extra capacity to deal with the rainwater falling on the catchment. So when it rains, that extra capacity is taken up by the rainwater, and as it said there, it's not unusual for more than 90% of the flow in a combined pipe during a rainfall event to be surface water flow. Not economical to size pipes to deal with all flows. Okay, so if you think of the worst rainfall event you've experienced in your life, the reality is that it would be too expensive to have a rainwater system that deals with every conceivable flow. The pipes would just be too big, too costly to maintain, etc. So typically we say that a pipe has a surcharge frequency of, say, 1 in 2 years. We'll talk about what that means in a second. 1 in 2 years, and that's really about economics. So what does surcharge mean? Now, this is where I'm going to try and draw something. We'll cover this more next week. We'll cover this next week. So this is your pipe. Okay, so it's below ground, and then you've got your manhole, which goes up to the surface, and that's your surface there. So this is a combined pipe during dry weather flow. So when it's not raining, your foul flow takes up, you know, a small amount at the bottom of the pipe. It's not very easy to draw in this application, so you get the idea. When it rains, we expect the flows in the pipe to increase. So then the flow gets up to here, say, and it's obviously it's all swirling around. So the pink, the purple and the blue water is all mixed together, the surface water and the foul drain. So once the flow gets up to the top of the pipe, so the flow depth gets up to there, that's the point at which we say it's surcharged. And in practical terms, what that means is that the pipe has become pressurised. So we expect that to happen on an average pipe once every 2 years. It reached that point on average. Obviously, as a householder, you don't care about that. You don't care about when the pipe surcharges. You don't even know it's happening. What you care about is when the water gets up to here, up to the surface, and it starts to cause you problems, and that's flooding. So when the water leaves the network onto the surface, that's flooding. But the pipes have designed for surcharging. We'll come on to this in a couple of weeks' time. So they're designed for surcharging, so that means we design the pipe so it's big enough so that it doesn't surcharge on, in a frequency of 1 in 2 years, say, and then we check to see when it would flood. We'll come back to that later, so excitingly enough. So this is how the network looks. So we have a town which is quite grey. It's maybe Dundee. Which collects the flows from the houses, and in each of these pipes is the foul flow and the surface flow mixed together, and that conveys these flows from here, and it takes them all the way to the treatment works. Okay, so during dry weather flow, this is what happens. Now, the issue we have is that when it rains, if the capacity of the network's exceeded, then what would happen was you would get flooding. And of course we don't want flooding because that's a big negative thing, and people don't like mixtures of rainwater and sewage coming into their house or into their garden. By and large, they're not very keen on that. So what we have is this thing called a CSO, which I spoke about in the last lecture, and this is like a safety release valve for the network. And what that does is it lets the flow discharge to the river. Okay, obviously it's not ideal, having sewage and rainwater mixed together put in the river, but it's better than not having it in someone's front room. So it's one thing's really important here though, is even when the CSO is discharging into the river, it's only the excess flows that goes into the river. There's still flow going to the treatment works. Okay. So, and this here, if you like, is a really basic design. The picture on the right is a really basic design of what a CSO might look like, inside the sewer system. So you've got on the left here, you've got your sewer pipe, which is taking the flow from the development onto the treatment works downstream. And then between that and this pipe on the right, you've got a wall, which is essentially a weir. Now, the capacity of the system downstream is set by the level of this wall. Okay, and I've drawn the blue line there. Once the flow exceeds that level, it's deemed that there's too much flow, and the flow will go from the left and it will go over into the right, and then off to the watercourse it goes. So it's nothing more sophisticated than that. And it's what you can, in this instance anyway, and what you can see here is you've still got the continuation flow going to the treatment works, but at this point there's too much flow coming through, so it goes over that wall and it goes off to the watercourse. The stuff up at the top of the pipe, I think, is some sort of sensor which detects the depths, and that'll tell the people back in the water company headquarters that they're spilling into the river. And in some jurisdictions that has to be reported to the environmental regulator, etc. So here's CSOs in a little bit sort of cartoon format. The same issue, you've got flows coming in, and then during dry weather flow they go off to the treatment works. During once the flow builds up, flows go over the weir and off into the river. Okay, by and large the fish don't like this kind of stuff going into the river, and I wouldn't be very keen on eating those fish either. Just basically the same setup but a different diagram, but perhaps a bit clearer, but you can see the same issue. You've got a weir setting level, you've got your spill volume goes over the weir, and the continuation flow goes on to the wastewater treatment works. So these things are relatively common. The one in the picture there is actually the one that's on the front of the urban drainage book. Yep. This one's in Edinburgh. I think I spoke about this in the last lecture. And I mean, if you walk down any river, any sizable river in the UK, you can see them, and quite often you can smell them if it's just after there's been a rainfall event. A few years ago, this slide goes back to 2004, there was quite a lot of heavy rain in London, and there was quite a lot of CSO spills. This had quite a negative impact on the water quality in the River Thames. Now, by and large, the negative impact on water quality is not that visible to the average person looking at the river. But what happened in this instance was that the pollutants consumed so much oxygen that quite a lot of large fish began to die, and that became quite a concern with the public, and it became quite newsworthy for over quite a long period of time. Now, but this isn't the first time this has happened. So this chap here, a Victorian called Joseph Bazalgette, he was faced with a similar problem in that there was so much sewage going into the River Thames, it began to smell quite a bit and cause all sorts of problems. And the Thames, like a lot of other rivers, it's tidal, and this tidal influence, back then it was more substantial because it was before the barrage was installed, I think. Well, it was definitely before the barrage was installed, but I think the barrage has some impact on the ebb and flow of the Thames as well. In that it quite often sewage in the river, as it's going downstream, it meets the incoming tide, and this can be a barrier to getting out to the estuary. So it would take longer than it otherwise would to get out of the estuary, and this was a particular problem at this time. So what Bazalgette realised was that, this comes from a bit of drawing coming in, was that quite a lot of the sewers discharging into the Thames were coming in perpendicular to the Thames. So these had been largely had perhaps been existing rivers which people were discharging sewage to, and they were discharging to the Thames. I mean, that's how combined sewers really came about. It started off as rivers that people discharged sewers to. They then became so smelly they covered them over, and that's really how the first sewers really started to form. So Bazalgette realised that these things were the source of the problem, and his solution to the problem was to look at, he's seen all these connections coming in, which I've just drawn on the slide here, and his solution, and forgive me if I've put all these in completely the wrong place, was to connect these up. So well, the word is he intercepted them, and this is an interceptor sewer, and it intercepts flows that would otherwise have went into the River Thames, and it took them downstream for some form of treatment. Now, and much of these sewers, so if you look at this picture on the right here, are actually in the embankment which goes along the Thames. They sit quite deep down, and so he built this back in Victorian times. But now wind forward to 2004, where we had the fish kills, which I showed you in the previous slide. The history was repeating itself. We had sewage being discharged into the Thames. So this meant that Bazalgette's solution was no longer coping, even though it was massively over-designed at the time. And so something had to be done. And the something that had to be done, what was agreed, was that an even bigger pipe is laid along the length of the Thames to collect these excess flows and take them to treatment. So if you like, it's a gross simplification, but it's about taking Bazalgette's solution and just, go for supersizing it, I guess is a word. Take, a big infrastructure solution to this problem. Now, I don't want to talk about this too long just now, but we'll speak about this again a little bit next week. And what I'll talk about a little bit next week is that other cities have been faced with exactly the same challenge, and they've responded to it in different ways. So the London solution was pretty much a big infrastructure solution. So the Thames Water, private owned company, they got permission from the regulator to invest quite a lot of money in this big infrastructure solution, which is what you see in the picture here. Now, other cities have taken a different approach, and I think the example we'll look at next week is Philadelphia. What they've done is they thought, well, the problem here isn't really the sewer not having enough capacity, which of course which is the problem really, but rather than making the sewer bigger, perhaps we should reduce the flows going into it. So in what I'll share next week, you'll see that in Philadelphia what they did was they disconnected some of the surface flows from sewer to relieve the pressure, and they found that to be a much cheaper way of solving the problem. So you've got London's went for this wholly infrastructure solution to it, more or less, and Philadelphia's went for this kind of green solution to it, where they're disconnecting surfaces, discharging flows, trying to recreate as much as possible the pre-development case, and so they went for that solution. And then the third case study I'll show you is from Portland in Oregon in the States, and they went for a little bit of both. So they went for infrastructure. They did a tunnel, not as big as this one, but they did a tunnel. They spent lots of money on it, but they also went for green solutions as well. So they did a bit of both. So I'm not saying any of these people are wrong, and although the green stuff does sound a bit more exciting, it's about people getting appropriate solutions and having to raise money for those solutions, and about the reliability of those solutions as well. But I think it's quite interesting that London's went for this whole infrastructure one, whereas other cities, which are faced with slightly different problems, but similar problems nonetheless, have went for different solutions. And there is a lot of people, you don't have to Google too much to find that a lot of people think that this solution isn't the right one, and perhaps Thames Water should have been thinking much more about disconnecting surfaces and thinking about a much more sustainable way of solving this problem. Because what you don't want is 100 years' time, another 100 years' time to have to build yet another pipe down the Thames because this one isn't big enough. So the really positive thing about that, though, back in 2004, and there's the similar ones I've spoken about, and in Philadelphia and in Portland and elsewhere, is it's really raised public awareness of how drainage systems interact with the urban environment and urban water courses, and the impact that can have on water quality. So this the cartoon on the right is from the 1990s, from a magazine called The Private Eye, where Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet are playing their game of Pooh Stick. So this is a game where they each put a stick in the river on one side of the bridge, then they go to the other side of the bridge to see whose stick comes out the other side first. It's a game that children quite often play. Sticks always take longer than you expect to come through, etc. So they're playing this game. There's a CSO under the bridge, and so Piglet says, well, Piglet exclaims, well, that's not my stick. So it's obviously something that's come at the CSO that Piglet has spotted rather than his stick. So it's like, I mean, it's not the funniest cartoon I've ever seen, but it's quite telling that this kind of joke is in a sort of mainstream magazine. So it tells you that people understand. Certainly the cartoonist was aware of the issue, and he expected the public who read the magazine to be aware of the issue as well, and to get the joke. And I think this issue coming to public consciousness can only be a good thing. It's not unusual to have signs alongside rivers as well, pointing out to people the risks posed by combined sewer discharges into water courses to human health. So this is Glasgow. So these slides are around 10 years old now. So the things have improved a bit, but I think it is really worth looking at the extent of the problem that Glasgow faced and still does face with CSOs. So typical CSO spill volume, so that's the amount of water spilled from CSOs into the Clyde, 50 million cubic metres per year. So it's enough to fill 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools over a year. 550 CSOs, 200 of them unsatisfactory, and the remaining 300 have aesthetic problems. Right, so unsatisfactory, what that means is the CSO is discharging without consent, more or less, and the one with aesthetic problems, that doesn't mean that the CSO itself doesn't look very nice. Who knows? That's about what's coming out of the CSO not looking very nice. So the aesthetic issue, it means that the CSO is discharged into the river, but not much has been done about removing the larger particles. I mean, these days, a lot of CSOs come with screens fitted, so the larger particles are removed from the outflow. So what's going in is basically liquid. There's still lots of pollutants in it, but it's just not quite as visible. And about removing those bigger particles is about removing the aesthetics of the problem. So this is a Clyde, and you can each black dot is a CSO. Has, well, certainly had real water quality impacts on the Clyde. You can see that large sections of it are noted as being seriously polluted. This is not just due to CSOs, but CSOs are a big part of it. And this is a kind of structure. So this is an unscreened CSO. The screen that's on this one is purely to stop kids and, I guess, adults and pet dogs and all the rest of it going inside the structure. It performs no real function in terms of removing the aesthetics, but it does cover quite a significant maintenance issue. So that's what's getting caught in the screen there. You can imagine there's much more getting discharged. Spoke about this last week about how when you get discharges into the river, the water levels are often quite high, so the trees and vegetation catch the CSO aesthetics, and when the water level subsides, these are left stranded and can be quite a visible reminder of what's happened. But the important thing is that the role that CSOs perform, and this is Glasgow, without those CSOs, this kind of flooding would have been much more frequent. So this is, serious issue, and the CSOs made this kind of event less frequent. Yeah. So one little aside here, so you can see. Well, firstly, there's somebody quite optimistic here on the left trying to sell their house. Good luck. So over this part of the picture, you can see you've got the manhole cover has lifted off, or is partially off, and the water's jetting out, and that's one of the sources of this flooding. So over here, where we see this blue circle, there's maybe quite a big hole in the ground where the manhole cover's either been lifted off. It could have come off with its frame as well, so it's a bit of a mess under the water there. And then not long after that, you've got these kids who are out for a bit of a play, which let's hope they had a good shower when they get home and wash their hands and all the rest of it. But over here somewhere, remember, is that where that manhole cover is lifted off. So if one of those kids had stood in that area, it wouldn't be very good for them, I don't think. So there is risks both during flood events, so both physical and also the pollutant risk represented by the sewage and the rainfall mixed together. Back to normal. So what is the alternative to CSOs? So since I graduated, there's been a lot of money spent in removing CSOs, and how that has been done has been largely done by adding storage to the network, or capacity to the network. So just like the big Bazalgette 2 pipe. So here we have the combined system. So we've got from the roof, we've got flow from the roof, foul flows from the house coming together into a combined system. So traditionally that would have just went straight over the CSO and into the river. But what's been happening recently, well, over the last 20 years, is more and more storage has been added to the network. So what happens with the storage is that the CSO doesn't discharge immediately. You've got this buffer. So rather than discharging, the network fills up a storage tank, and it's only when that storage tank is full does the CSO discharge. And obviously the storage tank is designed with a discharge frequency in mind, so it's not discharging for every event. And the bigger the storage tank, the less likely it is to discharge, but the greater its cost, and they come with a maintenance cost as well. So that's been the solution. This storage tank in Sheffield, 14,000 metres cubed. It's quite a big asset. Space has to be found for it. It's made of reinforced concrete. Lots of energy is involved. Lots of money is involved. Once it's created, it fills up with sewage periodically. Then it empties, but some residue is left. This attracts vermin or can, and also can be the source of odours. So they're big things, but they have to be quite carefully planned and designed. The biggest one of these I know about in Edinburgh is 50,000 metres cubed, which is huge, and I think the biggest one in the UK is in Blackpool, and it's 200,000 metres cubed. So these are big assets which require significant investment. And the one in Blackpool was really important because it was designed to reduce the amount of CSO spills going into the river and also to the sea. And Blackpool, the tourist economy along the beachfront, along the shorefront, is quite important. So what people don't want is warning signs up to do with sewage. So the 200,000 metres cubed was justified in that case, although I'm not sure how well it worked. It was justified in that case, but that really is quite unusual, quite an investment. As well as actual tanks, you can enlarge the size of the pipe, so the pipe itself becomes the storage tank. So the other solution to the CSO problem is not to mix the foul and rainwater flows. So most networks designed after the Second World War will be separate. And often the foul and separate pipes are laid together side by side. So all the foul flow has to be designed to cope with is peak foul flows, and your surface water drain is designed to deal with the design rainfall frequency. So here you have we've looked at the diagram earlier for a combined network which had the CSO in it. The system with the separate system means there's no CSO because all the rainwater discharges straight to the river, and the foul flow goes to the wastewater treatment works. So under this scenario there should be no foul flows going in the river. But there is obviously more surface water going into the river because under the combined system there'll be some rainfall events where there's no CSO discharges, but all that surface water goes to the wastewater treatment works, doesn't go directly into the river next to the watercourse. But under this scenario, in a simplistic way, the early strategy was just to discharge as much of the surface water to the nearby river as quickly as possible, because that was the cheap solution. But what that came with was flood risk and also environmental damage in terms of erosion. And we have to remember, we'll touch on this in a bit, is that the rainfall runoff from urban developments isn't free of pollutants. So surface water discharge points look like this. This one is on the Braid Burn in Edinburgh, and you can see there's a grating there, and behind the grating is the outlet. The outlet itself has got a non-return valve on it, which might not be clear in your picture. And what that does is that stops if the river level is high, it stops the river water going back up that pipe and causing problems somehow. The non-return valve, that's what that does. This is another one. This one is on the Water of Leith in Edinburgh. Not the prettiest of structures, I'm sure you'll agree. So the problem is with separate systems is they're more expensive because there's there's not twice the pipe work, there's a lot more pipe work. Early on it was kind of assumed there wasn't much pollutants in the surface water, but obviously there is. There's a lot of issues with misconnections between the two of them, and it doesn't take much for a lot of these benefits to be lost. So 3 sources of pollutants, there's much more than this. As you have on the left is the bottom of the street I used to live in Edinburgh, a place called Buxton. Here the gas board came along, dug up the road, and then they filled it back up again. But then what was left behind was all this silt, which you see in the picture. And obviously when it rains, that just gets washed off and it goes into the network. And then the surface drainage network or the combined network has to convey that silt to somewhere, whether it's a treatment works or into a local watercourse. Top right, yeah, you've got this chap shoveling something, and that something is road salt. So in the UK and elsewhere, we use road salt to prevent the footpaths and the roads from becoming too dangerous during the winter time, to help melt the ice or stop it forming. Thousands of tons of this are placed just in Edinburgh each year. It rains, it dissolves, that either ends up in the treatment works or it goes to the river. Thousands of tons of it, and that does have an environmental impact. The bottom right, we've got an oil spill on the road. This gets washed off, goes in the river, or it goes to the treatment works. As well as the oil coming from vehicles, you've got partially burnt fuel, which doesn't sound too much of a problem, but it is a significant problem. You've got tyre wear. You've also got degradation of the vehicle, particularly if you've got an older vehicle. And one of the most significant things is the wear of brake pads. If you've got non-ceramic brake pads, some of the materials inside those brake pads aren't very nice at all. Similarly, cars now with catalytic converters, if you have a crash and that becomes ruptured, they can cause real problems too. So there's lots of issues, particularly around a lot of the risks in terms of pollutants in urban areas are to do with the movement in motor vehicles, either routinely or during accidents or during winter time with the road salt. The biggest issues are braking and where vehicles are braking or changing direction. Because braking and changing direction, you get more tyre wear, and the braking gives you the wear of the brake pads. So it tends to be busy junctions are where the highest pollutant loads are from urban areas, particularly roundabouts and traffic light junctions. We do have gully pots in urban areas, and these are designed to try and intercept some of these pollutants. So what happens with these is that normally your water level will be up here during dry weather flow. Any larger particles coming into it will settle in the bottom, and so those larger particles won't go into the watercourse. So that's good. That's good news. We like that. So you've not got these large sediments going into not the watercourse, the downstream drain where it's combined or separate. So that's less of a problem. Obviously, as soon as you install this, you have to maintain it. You have to go around and empty the solid particles that are out at the bottom of it. These days, with tight financial budgets, I'm not sure if that happens as much as it used to do. The other issue you have is, as well as sediment particles getting washed off urban surfaces, there's all sorts of organic material, particular issues with dog waste, and also in some instances where your birds roosting overnight and that material washing into the river, into the gully pot. So that stuff comes into the gully pot and it rests in here and it gets a bit stinky. When it rains, let's change colour again. When it rains, the water comes in, and for some reason the water's green, and it swirls around. It takes all that biologically active material and quite smelly material, takes it out, and takes it to the river or the watercourse. And that is not always necessarily a good thing. So these things, they do have to be quite well maintained because they're expensive to store, and if you don't maintain them properly, you don't really get the benefits of having them. But even when they are maintained well, they're not without their problems as well. So this slide's about receiving water quality impacts, water impacts. We've spoken about this already, I think. Yep. So this is the key diagram that you'll see just in every textbook in this subject, is that before development, what you have is a relatively long, called hydrograph, as the catchment response to the rainfall. So you have a peak here, and the area under the graph is the total volume. What you get with development is you get the peak happens sooner and it's higher. So you get more flow and it comes out quicker. And if you're in the river, that's not good because you're going to get flooding. And if you're a wee beastie or a wee animal, your habitat's going to get washed away. So this isn't good. So whilst combined systems had their issues in terms of CSOs, separate systems, we get rid of the CSO water quality problem, but you do have the faster runoff getting into the river, and that bringing problems as well. And bearing in mind it's not pollutant free. So in your river, you can get scour. You can see the scour of the riverbank here, which is, it can be a natural process. I'm not saying it's always bad. Those sediments are then deposited somewhere, which could destroy another habitat, and you also get flooding. Okay, and this gets back to this basal jet issue on a much smaller scale, in that where your pipe network is already at capacity, that can then be a hurdle to then building new developments, because it's connected. You're trying to connect to a system which is already at capacity. So here we go. So perhaps we should design our drainage system to act as an undeveloped catchment. How can this be done? So this is about so-called sustainable drainage systems, and these came out of the agenda some time ago to try to, well, they've been around for a long time, but they came to the fore really around 2000 when there was this real drive for us all to live more sustainably, which that drive seems to be getting more and more accepted, right across our lives, not just in urban drainage systems, which is a positive thing. So it's about providing more natural approaches to managing runoff to help prevent the increase in flood or water pollution risk downstream, and about protecting the natural environment. So how does such change things? So it's about ensuring the runoff doesn't exceed the level set prior to development. So try to design your runoff rates so it replicates the rate before development. No downgrading of downstream water courses. Trying to treat the water as much as possible before it's discharged. So treatment area, this is often quite misleading. So when you talk about treating surface water runoff, it's not like it has to go to a wastewater treatment plants and you've got these big, it's not a process driven. It's about thinking, well, how do we slow the water down to try to encourage any sediments in the flow to settle out? How do we then think about how we can use natural processes to some extent to treat those pollutants? And it's also about considering the wider needs of the community. And by the wider needs we're talking about amenity, we're talking about biodiversity. So SUDs are about, if a really simple way of looking at this is that, so SUDs design are about water quantity, water quality, biodiversity, and amenity. So a really simple way of looking at that is to say that the combined systems were purely about managing quantity. It was about managing flood risk and really not thinking about too much else. Gross simplification, but that's really the driver there. And then when separate system came along, that was about acknowledging the quality issues to do with CSOs and about addressing them, and I think they were reasonably successful at doing that, but obviously there's still water quality issues that came out of it. And really what SUDS is doing is adding another couple of dimensions to that. So it's about amenity. So it's about how our developments can be improved by incorporating these green infrastructure techniques, and it's also about protecting the environment, biodiversity. So it's about, in a lot of ways it's making things more complicated, you might say, but it's about actually delivering extra value as well. So what it means is, rather than having a pipe below ground which just carries surface water, why not have that above ground in the form of a swale, which is just a muddy ditch? And the great thing about this is that whilst a pipe can block, it's much harder for the swale to become blocked. And if it does become blocked, you just have to send a guy along with a shovel, rather than expensive equipment trying to flush out the pipe. Rather than have reinforced concrete tanks below ground to store flow, we can have ponds above surface. Which act as storage devices before it's discharged to the environment, and because the water's still in there, any sediment particles in those flows will drop out and they can be removed later or periodically. And hopefully these can be devices that can add quite a lot of value to our developments. So if you're a household, I think if you're a householder, you want to overlook, well, most people do, want to overlook a nice pond that's got ducks in it and all the rest of it because it's delivering some amenity to you. But if you're a developer, you probably don't like the idea of having to give up some of your development to build ponds. You'd much rather build houses on that area. So that's been all right from the day one when SUDs were first proposed in the UK. That's been the stress, is about what is the cost to developers in terms of land take. As well as green devices, there's also less green devices. Probably the most common SUDs device in the UK is permeable paving. So this is a paving surface which allows water to go down between the spaces between the blocks and then is infiltrated into the ground or passed downstream. Not all block surfaces are permeable. Quite a lot of the ones installed in domestic driveways aren't, but I think quite a lot of the ones in supermarkets, etc., are permeable surfaces, and that's about them trying to meet the need for sustainable drainage systems in new developments. They can add a lot of value to developments. The one top left, this is in Firhill area of Edinburgh. The others, I think bottom left is also Firhill. The two on the right is down in Granton. And so these are ponds which collect surface water runoff, they treat it, and they reduce flood risk. But they also look pretty good as well, I think. This is J4M8 between Edinburgh and Glasgow, which is a distribution park, kind of like an industrial estate. And they have quite a good SUD scheme there, which I'll talk about in more detail in later lectures, but I'll just give you a really quick overview just now. So at the upstream end, you've got a car park. It's not permeable, but it is permeable. It's a permeable car park, and it discharges via a pipe into the wetland, which you can just see here. This is actually my old Ford Focus in the car park. So then that wetland discharges to the swale, and the water comes down here, and then that swale discharges to the pond, which you see at the bottom. So the idea being that having these multiple steps slows the water down more, and it means that more of the pollutants are removed with each step. So by the time this pond discharges into the watercourse, the water is actually quite good quality. On campus here and around campus, we have quite a few such devices. Just pause on these ones a bit longer. This device here on the bottom right, this is next to the park and ride, next to the campus. This is when it was first installed, and they used to keep the grass nice and short, which some people don't like. Some people it was rather more natural. But now it's not maintained at all, and it's an absolute eyesore because although it's great to see the natural plants growing there, it's also full of litter, etc. So, if it was completely natural and you had lots of natural plants, then you'd get lots of immunity from it. But when it's full of crisp packets and empty Coke cans, then it just looks awful, and rather than getting immunity, actually it's a bit of a downer when you go past it. I have to say, all those next to the university is not owned or maintained by the university, so I'm not being critical of Heriot-Watt University at all. This is a car park at a school in Portland in the States, which I visited, and the interesting thing here, well, kind of interesting, is that there used to just be a car park, and there was lots of flooding issues right across Portland. So they retrofitted SUDs to lots of areas, and what they did in this area was around the car park they put these green spaces. The trees help keep the cars cool to some extent. You can see that in the curbs you've got these dropped areas, and what they do is they take the flow from the playground and the car park and channel it into the sort of vegetated space there. So obviously the playground and the car park is quite a large area, so just being able to take that flow, not put it into the combined sewer system, but discharge it into these green areas, means there's quite a lot of flow that doesn't go into the sewer network, which is a good thing. Similarly in Portland, they installed quite a lot of these along the side of the road. You can see this one here. In some areas, residents dig out the plants that the council's provided, and they put their own plants in it, which either they feel look better for whatever reason. And these are quite common in Portland, and they're part of the character of the city. See a bit of litter there, though. That's not very good. So this such pond here is actually on campus, and it takes some of the flow from, I think, Research Avenue. It's called the road that goes from Ardwick, the Chadwick and Arrow building, and heads north through the research park. Adjacent to the campus, we have the park and ride, and here it is here. And then when this was first proposed, the park and ride, the council said, well, to the park and ride people, who also happen to be the council, said to them, well, yeah, you could install your park and ride here, no problem, as long as there's no extra flood risk in the Murray Burn. So they didn't want to see any extra flows going into the Murray Burn. So here it is here. It's not the most attractive of water courses, but I'm sure it has lots of value to the local environment. You can see it on the plan on the left, cutting through the field there. I should say, if you're not from the UK, what a park and ride is that it's for people who are commuting into the city from outside town, who would normally, in theory, take their cars all the way into the city centre, which just causes lots of congestion and pollution, etc. So the idea is, with these big car parks were built right around the city. People park their cars there, and then they can catch a bus into town. The one next to Heriot Wall, they're all the parking rides around the city on this side of the River Forth are 500 spaces with space to be doubled up in size. There's not too many of them, to be honest, and I'm a bit sceptical about what the real impact is on congestion and pollution. But at the end of the day, it's fewer cars going into the city, so that must be a good thing. So the park and ride, so park and ride is basically a big flat car park. So before pre-development, what we had was a farmer's field, and we had the Murray Burn, and here we have a fish inside the Murray Burn, and it was quite happy. Now, under the normal development scenarios, you know, if this was what we didn't use sustainable drainage, we would connect the park and ride, which is represented by the rather grey-looking building there. We'd connect it up and would discharge the flow from that into the local Murray Burn. Okay. Now the problem with this is during heavy rainfall, the Murray Burn would then flood, and the fish would get a little bit distressed. I'm not sure if fish that big are in the Murray Burn, and in fact I think that may even be a cod. But I think you get the point, is that the flooding causes quite a lot of environmental damage, as well as damage to the field that probably the farmer is not overly impressed with. So the alternative was to install suds. So basically we still build the park and ride, more or less this is the way we would have done, but then we connect the surfaces up to suds devices, and these suds devices store the flow and release it slowly either to groundwater or to downstream to the river later. So the fish in the river doesn't even really know that the park and ride has been built, because there's no change on the hydraulic environment in the river. So it's just, suds is just about doing things a little bit differently, about changing the nature of the development to try to improve the environmental situation. And so this is how it looks. We've got permeable car park surface in the park and ride car park, where the water can infiltrate down the spaces between the blocks. I've got a block here actually. At long last I found a use for this block in my office. So this is one of the blocks, and you can see the sides aren't flat. The design so the blocks don't fit together tightly, so you've always got a space between the blocks. The water filtrates between that space. There's gravel below. The gravel has obviously spaces between the gravel particles, so those spaces act as a kind of storage volume, and the gravel itself also filters the flows coming from the car park going through it. By and large, you wouldn't expect flows from a car park to be too polluted though, to be honest. Then from the car park, the water goes down these what is called a swale, but it's really a cascade of basins, which I think there's 4 of them. So it fills the top one, then that fills the second one, fills the third one, fills the fourth one. and that works relatively well. And then once the bottom one's full, hit discharges to the Murray Burn. Now, when these were first designed, it used to be really unusual for the bottom one to be full, and between rainfall events they would all be empty. But for some reason, I think it's poor maintenance. So this is more for on-campus students. Whenever you go past it, the top one's always full, and it's basically like a swamp. And the ones downstream seem to be filling up more and more. So I think it's getting more and more common for the bottom one to be full. And that's not because of climate change or anything crazy like that. That's just because it just needs maintained. And I think last year, actually, the division between two of the basins was dug out and reconstructed, but it doesn't seem to have had much of an impact. Personally, I think they're badly designed from two perspectives. Firstly, they're too close to the edge of the road, so it means that one side of the device you've got a road which is quite busy, or on another side of the road you've got a fence, which you can see in the picture there. Now what that means is if you want to maintain it, so if you want to remove litter from it, etc., it actually becomes quite dangerous because you're so close to the road and you have no space on the other side, so maintaining them becomes an issue. The second issue is that, and it's not really evident in the picture here, the size of them is actually quite steep, and I don't think it quite meets the design guidance. And why that's a problem is because it's so close to the edge of the road. What quite happens with the queuing traffic is the cars will squeeze up the side of it, and I'm amazed that a car's not fell into it yet because it's so steep. If your car went over just a little bit, it would end up going. So I think it's one of these things where they've had a space for the park and ride, they've tried to get as many cars parked on it as possible, and they've left as little space as possible for the actual SUS device. And I think they've left themselves with a space which is actually quite difficult for them to maintain. So hopefully they'll learn from this. A couple of years ago I was at an event where we talked about good examples of SUDs and bad examples of SUDs, and someone who I won't name here, who was involved with a park and ride, said that this was one of the worst SUDs they'd ever seen, which is a real shame because it's in such a public space and so many people go past it every day. But it's still a simple example for you to understand. It's more about the implementation rather than underlying design philosophy. So where we do get SUDs right, and I shouldn't have been quite so negative there, where we do get SUDs right, I think they really work. So this is Queen Margaret University. This is actually the artist's impression. This was complete a long time ago. And so this is a SUDS pond, and I've been out to see this, and it's quite pleasant. And this is something that actually adds value to the campus. So if you go out to this campus, they try to market their campus as being, a green campus, and they're very environmentally conscious, etc., which is really good. And this adds so much value to that message. And even without that message, without this pond, the campus wouldn't have the same look or feel. So it adds so much value to it. Likewise, this is a housing development in Kirkcaldy where I grew up, across in Fife. You've got the houses around the SUDS pond here. And again, I think this adds quite a lot of value. I mean, a nice day, the pond itself must look quite good. So I'll speak a little bit about a bugbear I've got there again. So you could see just in front of where I took this picture, there's a fence. And actually, where I took the picture, I was standing next to another fence. So there's 2 rings of fence goes round this SUDS pond. And that's because when these SUDS ponds were first installed, 10 years or so ago, there was a lot of locals' concern about children drowning in them. So it was decided that there'd be two rings of fence around the pond, and between those 2 rings of fence there'd be prickly bushes, and you can just see one at the edge there. So the idea was that the 2 fences and the prickly bushes would deter kids from going into the pond to play. And just to the right, of the picture, which is out of the image, there's also a lifebuoy thing. These things you get at the seaside or on a ship. So if someone falls in the water, you throw this thing at them, and somehow it helps them. So 2 things about that. the number of people who drown in ponds in the UK is virtually zero. The number of people who drown in their own bath is far, far higher. And I'm not saying that we should be complacent, but we have to recognise where risks lie. So that's one thing. The second thing is if I was a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old kid, would 2 fences and prickly bushes stop me from getting in that pond? Absolutely not. But if I was in there with my pal and one of my pals was in trouble, would it make it harder for me to get out to go and get help? Absolutely. So I think, I understand why these fences are there, but I really do question what function they're providing. A few years ago we surveyed people that lived next to such ponds, and ones that lived next to ponds which were unfenced, people were much more positive about them. But ones which were fenced off and had lots of safety messages, people viewed the pond as being a big safety risk. And I think this is because their awareness of the risk has been heightened, perhaps beyond what is reasonable. I mean, just next to this pond is actually quite a busy road, which used to essentially be like a bypass road around Kirkcaldy. Well, no, there is a proper bypass now, but this is the busy road along Kirkcaldy. The risk posed by that road is far, far higher than the risk posed by this pond, but there's not a fence along the edge of the road stopping kids from going near it. Likewise, when they go down to the seaside in Kirkcaldy, which is a great place to be, the seaside isn't fenced off, and there's not kids drowning in the sea. So I really do question this approach, but I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it's worth people questioning it when they come across it. So just to recap then, we've spoke about combined systems, we've spoke about separate systems, and we've spoke about SUD systems today. And what I want you to think about here is that combined systems are really, what we're stuck with in terms of a lot of the infrastructure we've got in the UK, those pre-1945 houses, and that's what we've got. Then we transitioned to separate systems, which remove CSOs but brought other problems with them. And then we're now in the transition towards sustainable systems. In a lot of ways, sustainable systems are really just a version of separate. It's just a different way of dealing with those separate flows, because the foul flow is still completely in its own pipe. So, but the challenge going forward is that so much of the infrastructure is still combined, and that still poses so many challenges to us. In Glasgow, part of the CSO problems, a part of the response to the CSO problem, which I spoke about earlier, they speak about decombining their combined network, which you can imagine the cost that would come with, and that's happened elsewhere in the world as well. So a huge challenge. What's almost interesting is that lots of the separate developments that were built weren't actually connected up to the surface water flows, weren't actually connected up to rivers. Where I used to live and still live is Buxton in Edinburgh. Now, the 1970s part of that development, they had, when it was built by, I think it was Miller Homes, they have a separate system, a foul pipe and a surface water pipe for every house. They all connect up under the street, and the surface water pipe goes with the foul pipe goes all the way down to the main road, which is called Braid Road, I think it connects to. So the foul pipe at that point, it connects into the combined pipe, which is that's the best solution for that pipe. So that's because you can't have a separate foul pipe that goes all the way to treatment work. So the foul pipe connects into the combined pipe. So the big question is, what happens to the surface water pipe? So the surface water pipe gets to the end of the development, where you're back into the existing infrastructure back in 1970. There's no river to connect it to. There's no river anywhere close. So what do you do with this surface water pipe? Well, what they did with it back in 1970 was they connected it to the combined pipe as well. So although you've got this development, and I think it's about 800 houses, completely separate, everything's perfect. When both the pipes come down to the point where they leave the development, they'll both go into the combined pipe again. Back in 1970, the engineer said, well, in the future, someone will take care of this problem and will decombine this pipe, and this problem will be solved. And I do wonder if back in 1970, he thought or she thought this problem would have been solved by now. Well, there's a thought for you. So this last diagram I want to talk about, along with this last diagram I want to talk about, is this is a flow diagram which this is used to understand, well, to track through the causes of flooding in different developments. And I don't want to go through this in detail, but really what it shows is the complexity of how all these different parts of the network interact. So this diagram allows for, for customers to be talked through whether or not their flooding is because of a combined network, a separate network, a such network, and also looking at all the different impacts of that. So I flicked this diagram up earlier, but I thought it was worth coming back to. So what these 17 little icons represent is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So these are part of the UN's drive, and I've got it here. Let's get it exactly, I think. If you don't mind, I'll just read this out just so I get it right. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs are called, which are an urgent call for action by all countries developing and developed in a global partnership. They recognise that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So what these goals are about, I guess, is about thinking about how we develop as a planet into, to be more sustainable, but also be living fairer societies and communities. And these goals are actually at the heart of this. And this isn't about drainage or water. This is about everything we do, as we use the word civilization, as a civilization. But what's really interesting is if you look at these 17 icons, and I won't go through this in detail, but if you look at these 17 icons and think about how much of them impact on what I've been speaking about over the last hour and 18 minutes or so far. Opinions will differ, but this is just my quick scan. So good health and well-being. We spoke about how the SUDs can deliver that amenity value. And there's no doubt living in, well-designed urban developments with lots of access to green space, there's no doubt that's a beneficial thing. Access to clean water and sanitation, number 6. Sustainable cities and communities, number 11. Responsible consumption, not least of water, and the impact that has on the urban environment because of the discharges of CSOs and all the rest of it we've been speaking about. Life below water, the impact of the urban runoff on the water courses and eventually the oceans. So just what we've been speaking about today is amazing impact that these things can have on, not just on civil engineering is what I'm trying to say, but also the wider communities we live in, and how urban drainage doesn't have to be something that's below ground in pipes, but can be above ground, in parks and in community spaces, actually making a positive contribution rather than either a negative one or a hidden one. So I think that's something we can be really positive about. And that's my final slide, you'll perhaps be glad to hear. So, as ever, if you've got any questions, please get in touch. if you go to on Vision, there's a discussion board set up where you can ask questions about this lecture today, and hopefully I'll be able to answer it, but I absolutely do not mind if other students in the class want to have a go at answering any questions that people have. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.